The skies above Orelon 7 bled violet and ash, streaked with the wreckage of starships and the lingering hum of energy pulses. The Orion Reach had crumbled, but not completely. Somewhere in the chaos of retreat, Sergeant Kane Ward had been left behind, forgotten, or perhaps assumed dead. He drifted in the wreckage field, the vacuum of space cutting close, and the oxygen dwindling with every labored breath. Kane's helmet was cracked, the visor smeared with alien blood and his own. His communicator hissed in static. No friendly signal penetrated the interference. The last orders he remembered were clear: retreat, regroup, evacuate. Humanity had abandoned him. The thought gnawed at his gut, a bitter stone of betrayal and disbelief. But even as despair threatened to crush him, something deeper flickered, a stubborn ember of will. He exhaled, feeling the weight of survival pressing him to action. Floating amidst the debris, he spotted a partially intact dropship, scorched but salvageable. Every movement hurt. His ribs protested, his leg throbbed, but Kane clambered inside. It was nothing more than a coffin in the making, a temporary shelter from an unforgiving world. Outside, Orelon 7's twin suns sank beneath jagged mountain ridges, painting the land in molten gold and shadow. The planet itself seemed alive, breathing a slow, ominous rhythm. Strange creatures, tall, spindly forms with obsidian skin, emerged from the forests. They had seen the humans die. They had seen the ships fall. And yet, they lingered, curious, intelligent. Kane's rifle lay beside him, too heavy to lift, so he wrapped his arm in desperation around the one functional plasma pistol. He didn't know if it could harm these beings, or if they even understood the concept of attack, but the instinct to fight, to survive, burned hotter than any rational fear. As darkness fell, the first alien voices reached him, not in words, but in vibrations, guttural and resonant. Kane tilted his head, listening, trying to decode meaning from sound. They circled, cautious, intrigued, unafraid. For a moment, he imagined he could communicate gesture, glance, survival instinct. And he realized something profound. This world was not dead. The war might have ended for the Terrans, but life here pulsed stubbornly, and he had stumbled into the middle of it. Hours stretched. Hunger clawed at him. Dehydration pressed him toward madness, yet Kane forced his mind into a calm rhythm. He scavenged supplies from the wreckage, assembling what little tech he could jury-rig. Small victories, insignificant by most standards, became lifelines. Each spark of electricity, each sip of scavenged water, each pulse of heat from the planet's minerals became proof. He could survive. He would survive. The stubbornness in his chest grew into defiance. And then, at the edge of the forest, something moved, a massive, lithe shape, watching. Kane froze. His heart hammered. The alien was not attacking. It simply observed, as if waiting for Kane to make the first move. For hours they stared, predator and prey blurred into a single tension. He whispered a prayer, quiet, instinctive, not for victory, but for understanding, for life. A faint wind carried it, and the alien recoiled slightly, as though sensing the weight behind the words. Days blurred into nights, or whatever the alien measure of time was. Kane discovered patterns. The locals were curious, social in strange ways, and territorial. They seemed to communicate in gestures and vibration, signaling with their bodies, touching, pressing, almost like music. He began mapping the rhythms, noting the signals, slowly trying to anticipate behavior. He realized the war was not just human against alien, but understanding against chaos. Survival meant more than firepower. It meant empathy, observation, strategy. His first major test came without warning. A pack of predators, smaller, faster, their claws like shears, rushed from the trees, ignoring his calls, closing with lethal speed. Kane had no time to aim. He could only act. Rolling, diving, firing the plasma pistol into the approaching mass, he realized something extraordinary. His shots caused them to hesitate, not kill, not strike, but freeze. Confusion, perhaps intelligence, glimmered in their alien eyes. They backed off. Kane, panting and trembling, felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since leaving Terran soil. Control, influence, mastery of chaos, however small. That night, as he huddled beneath the twisted hull of the ship, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. He was alone, yes, abandoned, but not powerless. Humanity's reach had faltered, but the human spirit, the stubborn, defiant spark that refused to yield, still lived in him. He could fight, he could teach, he could survive. And maybe, one day, he could turn this desolate world into something more than a grave. Above him, the alien skies shimmered with stars alien to Terrans, yet somehow familiar in their silent majesty. Kane whispered again, softly, almost to himself, "Someone didn't want me dead. Someone is still watching." The words tasted of faith, not certainty, but hope, the kind that carried men through the impossible. And somewhere, in the shadows of the forest, eyes watched him back, curious, calculating, unafraid. They did not yet know the meaning of human. They did not yet know the strength of one soldier left behind. But Kane Ward was about to show them. And somewhere in the dark, the humans began to pray. Kane must make first contact with the alien tribes, and every choice will weigh life against death, teaching the aliens the spark of humanity before he even intends to. Kane Ward moved through the twilight of Orolon 7 with a predator's caution, each step measured, each breath silent. The forest around him pulsed with life vines shifting like serpents, insects glowing faintly in iridescent waves, and the ever-present, unblinking eyes of the tall, spindly aliens. They were everywhere, watching, curious. Kane felt the weight of their attention like a tangible pressure, and yet he pressed forward. Retreat was not an option. Survival demanded engagement. The first direct encounter was abrupt. A small group of the aliens, 6 in number, stepped into the clearing as if rehearsed, their limbs moving with uncanny coordination. Kane's pulse shot up. He raised the pistol, ready to fire, but his instinct screamed at him to pause. There was intelligence in their gaze, curiosity, not malice. Slowly, deliberately, Kane lowered his weapon, fingers trembling. He had survived countless firefights against the best-trained forces Terran Marines could muster. And yet this was something different. This required understanding, not firepower. He knelt, keeping his body low, arms slightly extended in the universal signal of peace. The aliens tilted their heads, their movements precise, almost elegant. Kane whispered softly, a habit he had formed in the isolation, "I'm not here to fight. I want to live and learn." His words were absurdly human, yet they carried a weight. The aliens did not speak, but one taller than the others, with faintly luminescent ridges along its spine, stepped forward, curious, measuring. Kane could feel the tension ripple through the group. One wrong move, and centuries of survival would end in seconds. Days became a fragile dance of gestures, glances, and cautious mimicry. Kane discovered patterns in their communication. Subtle shifts in posture, synchronized gestures, rhythmic vibrations. He mimicked them, sometimes successfully, sometimes painfully. The aliens began to respond, slowly, testing the limits of trust. For the first time, Kane realized he could influence their behavior not through force, but through observation, empathy, and patience. The lesson was stark. Survival on Orolon 7 demanded more than muscle, it demanded understanding, a human subtlety often ignored in the heat of battle. By the third week, Kane had managed what he dared to hope, a rudimentary dialogue. A simple exchange of gestures became a conversation. He learned their names, not as Terrans would understand names, but as identifiers in their complex social web. He learned of their fears, their hunting patterns, their reverence for certain silent stones scattered across the forest, places Kane instinctively respected, sensing the unspoken divinity in their ritual. Sometimes at night, he whispered a quiet prayer, "Keep me alive. Let me learn from them, not destroy them." And inexplicably, he felt a warmth in the air, a subtle shift in energy, as though his survival were being watched and guided. The first true test came not from the forest, but from the skies. A scouting drone from a passing Terran fleet appeared, scanning for survivors. Kane's pulse raced. For years, he had imagined rescue as the answer, but now he understood. He had begun to build something here that no fleet could reclaim. These aliens, these strange beings, were learning from him. He had survived by defiance, by ingenuity, and now they looked to him as a teacher. Should he risk exposing this fragile bond to the Terran technology that might obliterate everything he had built? He hesitated, weighing instinct against hope, reality against vision. The drone hovered, mechanical eyes scanning. Kane froze, heart hammering. Slowly, deliberately, he waved a signal, an invitation to ignore him. The drone hesitated, then, in a decision he couldn't comprehend, turned and vanished into the void. Kane exhaled, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down. In that moment, he realized something profound. Survival was not merely about living, but about influence, about leaving a mark that mattered. He was no longer just a soldier stranded on a distant world. He was a seed. The aliens sensed this shift. Their gestures became more deliberate, almost reverent. They began to follow him deeper into the forests, observing, mimicking, learning. Kane began teaching, not with weapons or drills, but with ideas. How to anticipate predators, how to construct shelter, how to use the environment as an ally. In quiet moments, he would pause, gazing at the alien stars overhead, whispering a prayer of gratitude or sometimes confusion. This isn't luck," he murmured once. Someone wanted me to live." Time stretched in strange loops. Seasons changed, though the aliens measured them differently, and Kane grew stronger, not just in body, but in purpose. The forest, once hostile and alien, became a place of understanding, a canvas for his ingenuity. He realized that over decades, if not centuries, he could shape this civilization, could impart humanity's stubborn defiance, its creativity, its empathy. And perhaps when the rest of Terran forces returned, they would find not just a survivor, but a legend. Yet even in these moments of quiet triumph, Kane wrestled with doubt. He was teaching beings he did not fully understand. What if they turned hostile or misunderstood his intent? What if he failed, and centuries of hope crumbled in a single instant? These fears clawed at him in sleepless nights, in the silent stretches between alien gestures. And yet, he pressed forward. Humanity's essence, he realized, was not perfection, it was persistence, the stubborn refusal to surrender to despair. He had been left behind, yes, but in that abandonment lay opportunity, to shape, to endure, to inspire. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the jagged horizon, Kane observed a small group of aliens attempting to mimic a rudimentary tool he had fashioned, a hunting spear. They fumbled, collided, stumbled, yet kept trying. Kane felt a surge of pride and awe, tempered with a humbling clarity. This is the spark," he whispered, almost to the wind. "It's not just survival, it's creation. It's defiance." And in that moment, a thought struck him like lightning. If one human could teach them, guide them, inspire them, then perhaps one human could change the fate of worlds, not with firepower, not with fleets, but with will. And somewhere in the dark canopy of the alien forest, a presence he could not see shifted. Kane didn't know if it was luck, fate, or something beyond comprehension, but he felt it calm, patient, guiding. And the alien seemed to feel it too, sensing the weight of this solitary Terran who refused to die, who refused to surrender, who refused to be forgotten. That night, Kane slept with a half-formed smile. His dreams were filled not with battlefields or retreat, but with the faces of the creatures learning from him, watching him, trusting him. And somewhere, in that quiet moment, he understood the truth of his survival. It was never meant to be just endurance. It was meant to be legend. And deep in the forest, the first whispers of legend began to stir. Kane's growing influence over the alien tribes, will face its first existential threat, a rival alien faction that challenges his authority and tests humanity's cunning against raw alien brutality. Decades had passed, though Kane did not count them in Terran years. Time on Auralon 7 had its own rhythm, dictated by the pulsing light of twin suns and the silent shifting of alien moons. The forest, once hostile and alien, had become his classroom, his sanctuary, his battlefield. The aliens, those who had first circled him with suspicion, now followed him with reverence. Kane had taught them to build, to hunt, to survive. He had taught them to observe, to anticipate, to reason. Yet the forest had other students, other tribes, less disciplined, more savage, and they did not respect the quiet law of Kane's making. It began with whisper-stalked paths, shattered nests, hunting grounds disturbed. One morning, Kane discovered the remnants of a skirmish, claw marks deeper, blood darker than anything his pupils had seen before. He felt the familiar weight of danger tighten his chest. His pupils, the young ones he had trained, strong now in muscle and mind, looked to him for guidance, their wide alien eyes reflecting fear, respect, and unspoken questions. Kane knelt, touching the soil, reading the patterns of attack. He understood without words. This was a challenge. They had come to test the humans' teachings, to see if the lone Terran's influence was truly worth following. Kane's first instinct was to prepare defenses, but he paused. Years on Auralon 7 had taught him patience, observation, subtlety. The savages would come, yes, but he would not meet them with mere force. He would meet them with strategy, with ingenuity, with humanity itself. The forest whispered with possibility, and Kane listened. The first attack came at dawn. The rival faction struck in waves, their bodies sleek and muscular, their claws and teeth weapons honed by generations of survival. Kane's pupils fought valiantly, but the aliens were fast, coordinated, relentless. Kane moved among them, a conductor in a symphony of chaos, directing their formations, calling on patterns, anticipating the enemy's moves. His plasma pistol sang fire, but it was his mind, his ability to read, predict, manipulate, that turned the tide. Every movement, every strategy, every improvisation screamed of human ingenuity, of the relentless spark that refused to yield. Hours stretched into a blur. Kane's body ached with fatigue, his lungs burned with exertion, yet he continued. The rival tribe pressed, relentless, and for a moment, doubt gnawed at him. Could one man, alone among humans and aliens alike, truly command such tides? Could his will alone bend the chaos into order? And then, in a moment of quiet clarity, he realized the answer. It was never about his strength, never about the firepower. It was about their trust, their belief, their willingness to act under guidance. Humanity's essence, he realized again, was not muscle, but mind, will, and unity. By nightfall, the rival tribe retreated, beaten but alive. Kane's pupils tended the wounded, their eyes wide with awe and fear, and he felt a swell of pride tempered with sorrow. Death had walked among them, and they had survived, not through brute strength, but through the lessons he had imparted. Kane's gaze lingered on the stars, shimmering faintly through the canopy. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for victory, but for guidance. Not luck. Someone wanted me to survive this. Someone wants them to survive too. The aftermath revealed more than survival. Kane discovered that the rival tribe had been watching, learning, calculating. The challenge had tested his teachings, yes, but it had also spread them. Whispers of the lone Terran's methods, his strategies, his defiance, began to ripple across the forests, reaching even the furthest corners. Kane realized that his influence was growing, unintentional yet undeniable. Humanity, even when abandoned, could shape the universe, not through fleets or empires, but through example, through persistence, through sheer will. Weeks passed. Kane trained his pupils harder, but now with a new understanding. They did not need him only for survival. They needed him as a mentor, a guide, a living legend. He taught them not just to fight, but to think, to reason, to innovate. He taught them that survival was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. And he taught them faith, not in technology, not in weapons, but in the unseen, in the quiet logic of the universe that guided the willing toward survival. Some nights he would rise before dawn and whisper to the stars, "There's something watching, something guiding. Let it see our courage." The forest itself seemed to acknowledge the shift. Predators avoided his pupils' encampments. Rivers ran clear, fertile, abundant. Even the weather seemed to temper, as if recognizing the fragile balance Kane had established. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Kane felt it as he walked among the trees, his pupils at his side, their eyes reflecting both trust and curiosity. This world, once indifferent, now bent slightly toward the human's influence, not by dominance, but by respect, by understanding. Yet even in these moments of triumph, Kane remained vigilant. He knew that the true test was not the rival tribes, or even the hazards of Orlan 7 itself. The true test would come when humanity returned, when fleets of Terrans descended on the planet, expecting survivors, but finding legends. What would they think of the civilizations he had shaped? Would they recognize the spark of human defiance, or dismiss it as mere anomaly? These questions gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside. There would be time for that later. For now the forest demanded his full attention, and he would not falter. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the jagged horizon, Kane watched a young pupil struggle with a simple task constructing a shelter using principles Kane had taught. The alien stumbled, frustrated, then paused, looking at Kane with wide eyes as if seeking reassurance. Kane smiled, a tired, quiet smile. He knelt beside the pupil, guiding hands, teaching not with words but with presence. The lesson was not just about construction. It was about perseverance, patience, and trust. The pupil nodded, understanding dawning, and Kane felt the truth of what he had become. More than a soldier, more than a survivor. A teacher, a legend, a spark of humanity in the wild expanse of Orlan 7. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of the forest, eyes watched him, not hostile, not entirely benevolent, but aware. Kane did not see them, yet he felt the weight of observation. He knew the forest held more trials, more challenges, more tests of will. And he knew that each one would shape not just him, but the civilization he was quietly building. Humanity, even in exile, had a way of leaving a mark permanent, unyielding, unforgettable. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Kane sat alone, gazing at the stars above. And for the first time in decades, he allowed himself a thought that terrified and exhilarated him all at once. He was not merely surviving. He was creating history. And somewhere in the distance, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next trial. Kane's teachings and influence will be challenged not just by rival tribes, but by the planet itself. Hostile environments, alien storms, and life-threatening anomalies will force humanity's ingenuity to its absolute limits. The twin suns had barely risen when Orlan 7 reminded Kane Ward why it was a world that spared no mercy. The forest, lush and alive, had a heartbeat of its own, sometimes slow, sometimes violent, always unpredictable. That morning, the wind carried an unusual scent, ozone, metal, and the faint tang of something dying. Kane's instincts, honed over decades of survival, screamed at him to prepare. But this threat was unlike the rival tribes, unlike the predators. This was the planet itself. A storm was brewing. Not the gentle storms of Terran weather systems, but a massive, rolling force of nature. Clouds swirled in unnatural patterns, painting the sky with violet lightning and shadows that moved like living things. The ground trembled beneath Kane's boots as he moved among his pupils, signaling them to reinforce shelters, to gather food, to secure what technology and supplies they had scavenged. He did not need words. Years of trust had transformed gestures into commands understood across species lines. "Focus," he murmured, almost to himself. "Every movement counts." Watch, adapt, survive. The first wave of the storm hit with a ferocity that made the trees scream and the rivers churn. Torrential rain mixed with acidic mist, etching painful burns across exposed skin. Lightning struck with surgical precision, igniting fires and splitting the ground. The aliens scattered, some instinctively following Kane, others retreating to hidden caves, but the lesson was immediate. Survival would demand everything they had learned, and more. Kane moved through the chaos, directing his pupils like a general in a battlefield no human army could have imagined. He built barriers from fallen trees, rerouted streams to prevent flooding, and used the terrain as a shield against the wind and rain. His own body was battered, muscles screaming, skin cut and bruised, yet he refused to stop. Each action, each decision, was a lesson for the aliens. Humans adapt, humans endure, humans defy. Hours passed. Kane noticed a young alien struggling against a surge of wind, its small limbs flailing. Without hesitation, he lunged, gripping the creature and pulling it behind a sturdy outcropping. The alien trembled, eyes wide, yet something flickered in them trust. Kane realized then that these beings had begun to internalize his lessons. They were not just surviving, they were learning to think, to anticipate, to act with precision. And the thought filled him with both pride and sorrow. He had been a lone soldier, yet now he was building a civilization capable of defying death itself. The storm worsened. A sudden lightning strike ignited a tree directly above one of the alien shelters. Kane dove, shielding the group from falling debris, feeling splinters pierce his skin, rain washing away the sting. He rose, coughing, and shouted instructions, each word cutting through the roar of wind. Move the young to higher ground. Reinforce the walls. Watch the rivers. His pupils obeyed, their coordination now remarkable, a product of decades of guidance, teaching, and shared survival. And yet, even as they endured, Kane felt the creeping shadow of doubt. Could he truly protect them all? Could one man, no matter how clever, survive against the relentless wrath of a planet? His chest tightened, heart hammering, not from physical strain, but from the weight of responsibility. He had become more than a survivor. He was a shepherd of life in an alien wilderness, and every misstep could mean death. Night fell, but the storm persisted, relentless and unforgiving. Kane huddled with his pupils beneath a partially collapsed shelter, tending wounds, rationing water, whispering guidance. He watched the alien faces, marked by exhaustion and determination, and felt a profound surge of human pride. Even in the face of overwhelming natural fury, they endured. They learned. They adapted. Humanity's essence, ingenuity, courage, and will was alive in them now, reflected in eyes not human, but alive with understanding. In the quiet moments between the storm's roar, Kane whispered a prayer, soft, instinctive, almost unnoticed. Keep us alive. Guide us. The wind shifted, and for a fleeting second, the storm's fury seemed to temper, a subtle pause in nature's onslaught. Kane allowed himself a fraction of hope, though he did not name it. Hope on Orolon 7 was a fragile, dangerous thing. But necessary, vital, human. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the forest scarred but standing. Rivers had swollen, trees had fallen, yet Kane's pupils emerged, bruised but unbroken. They looked to him not just as a teacher, but as a symbol, a single Terran who had endured centuries, who had faced death repeatedly and yet refused to bow. Kane observed them, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had built. These beings, once alien and incomprehensible, were now capable of survival, adaptation, and thought guided by a spark of human wisdom. And yet, Kane knew this was only the beginning. Orolon 7 had tested them once, but the planet's challenges were endless. Predators, rival tribes, and the merciless environment would continue to push them to the brink. Survival required not just courage, but creativity, patience, and faith, a faith that Kane felt quietly in the universe's subtle guidance. He had survived storms, battles, and solitude by trusting that there was something greater watching, something shaping the chaos in subtle ways. The aliens seemed to sense it too, in the quiet moments, in the instinct to protect, in the lessons learned without words. As Kane prepared for the next challenge, he walked among the damaged shelters, inspecting each improvisation, praising effort, correcting mistakes. His body ached, his mind spun with possibilities, but he felt alive in a way Terran soldiers rarely did. Survival was no longer about following orders. Survival was about thinking, creating, and guiding others to defy the impossible. And somewhere, in the depths of the forest, a shadow observed, not a rival, not a predator, but a presence waiting. Kane did not see it, yet he felt it. A test yet to come. A challenge that would demand all the lessons he had taught, all the ingenuity he possessed, and all the courage of the human spirit. That night, as the alien moons rose above jagged peaks, Kane whispered, almost to himself, "The world tests us, and we endure." And deep in the forest, something ancient stirred, sensing the spark of life that refused to be extinguished. Kane's influence is about to expand beyond survival. He will begin to forge a society, teaching the alien tribes not just to endure, but to fight, to plan, to remember, and legends will be born. Years folded into decades, but Kane Ward measured time differently, now not in Terran years, but in survival cycles, in seasons of growth and decay. The forest of Orolon 7 had become his academy, his crucible. The alien pupils he had once saved from predators now moved with confidence, their limbs precise, their minds quick, their trust in Kane absolute. But survival alone was no longer enough. Kane understood this instinctively. To endure was temporary. To thrive, to create civilization, required vision. And he would give it. The first step was organization. Kane mapped the forests, the rivers, the hunting grounds, the hidden caves. He created zones, teaching his pupils to defend, to forage, to collaborate. He introduced concepts alien to their species: coordination, planning, contingency. Simple drills became complex exercises. Each action was deliberate. Each failure was a lesson. Kane's voice, calm but insistent, carried through the camps. Adapt, anticipate, survive. But remember, think ahead, plan, learn. The aliens, curious and receptive, began to mimic not just his words, but his thought patterns. They learned to anticipate each other's moves, to strategize, to communicate in ways more sophisticated than instinct alone. Kane marveled at their intelligence, but also remembered the stubborn spark of humanity that guided his own actions. Teaching them, shaping them, felt like extending his own existence, embedding the human will into another species. It was not all harmony. Conflicts arose between the tribes he had yet to unite. Territorial disputes, misunderstandings, even occasional violence erupted. Kane stepped into each dispute, not with weapons, but with mediation, reasoning, demonstration. He showed them that coordination was strength, that shared purpose meant survival. Slowly, grudgingly, the tribes began to recognize his authority, not as a conqueror, but as a guide. His title grew in whispered reverence, the Lone Terran. Kane did not stop at survival tactics. He introduced memory systems, teaching the aliens to record events with markings, sounds, and gestures. He encouraged rituals to honor victories and mourn losses. Through these acts, they began to understand history, legacy, and the weight of choice. Kane realized that even on a distant alien world, human traits, empathy, creativity, reflection could take root. Humanity, he mused, was not bound to a planet. It was an essence, a spark, a defiance against oblivion. One evening, as the twin moons bathed the forest in pale light, Kane watched a young alien practice the spear drill he had devised decades earlier. The creature's movements were deliberate, precise, yet fluid, embodying lessons Kane had taught and instincts he could not have instilled. Kane's chest tightened, not from pride alone, but from the realization of what he had become. He was no longer a survivor. He was a creator, a legend in real time, shaping not just lives, but the future of a civilization. But creation invites challenge. From the edges of the forests came reports of a new threat, a predator unlike any they had faced. Massive, armored, fast, and intelligent. Kane's pupils had never seen such a creature. Panic rippled through the fledgling society. Kane felt the familiar tension rise in his chest. He could fight it with firepower, but that would teach nothing. Humanity survived through ingenuity, through cleverness, through courage guided by understanding. Kane studied the terrain, the creature's habits, its patterns. He devised a plan, subtle and brilliant. The aliens listened, mimicked, and executed with precision. They created traps, lured the predator into a canyon, and immobilized it without a single unnecessary death. Kane's pupils stared in awe at the result. The raw power of the alien world had been bent, guided by human strategy. And in their eyes, Kane glimpsed the birth of faith, not just in him, but in the unseen order that allowed intelligence and courage to triumph over chaos. Night fell, and Kane, exhausted, looked to the stars through a break in the forest canopy. He whispered a prayer, barely audible. We survived, not by luck, but by design. By will, the wind shifted. Somewhere deep in the wilds of Orolon 7, a faint, unexplainable calm spread, as if the planet itself acknowledged the spark Kane had ignited. Kane knew the next phase was inevitable. Survival had transformed into society. The lone Terran could guide, but he could not be everywhere. He began appointing leaders among his pupils, mentoring them to teach others, creating a chain of influence that would extend far beyond his reach. The forest hummed with activity, alive with human-guided purpose, each tribe a note in a larger symphony of civilization. Kane watched, a quiet satisfaction settling in him, tempered by the knowledge that each day brought new challenges, new lessons, new dangers. Yet he remained vigilant. Orolon 7 was a living world, indifferent to ambition or loyalty. The rivers could flood without warning, predators could adapt, and rival tribes still lurked, waiting for mistakes. Kane understood that the survival of the civilization he was forging depended not just on strength, but on foresight, patience, and subtle faith, a belief that their efforts were being guided by something greater, unseen, yet real. As dawn broke over the forest, Kane walked among his pupils, observing, correcting, encouraging. He realized then the truth of what he had built, not just survival, not just strategy, but culture, memory, and the foundation of legend. He was no longer just Kane Ward, the soldier left behind. He was Kane Ward, the lone Terran, the spark that would light the fires of civilization on Orolon 7 for generations to come. And somewhere, in the silence between the trees, eyes watched not with hostility, but with acknowledgement. The world, the planet, the unseen order of the universe, all were aware. Kane had survived storms, battles, and abandonment. Now he was shaping history. And deep in the forest, the first murmurs of a story began to circulate. The lone Terran teaches, endures, and survives. A human among aliens defying time itself. Kane's growing civilization will face its ultimate moral and tactical challenge. War with a rival tribe that refuses to submit, testing human ingenuity, courage, and diplomacy to the forest had grown into a living city under Kane Ward's guidance. Paths were cleared, shelters fortified, hunting grounds mapped with precision. The alien tribes had learned to cooperate, to innovate, to survive together. Kane had built more than survival. He had built a society, but civilization attracts conflict. From the far reaches of the wilds, a rival tribe emerged, larger, more aggressive, unwilling to submit to Kane's authority or teachings. The first scouts returned with tales of devastation. Villages burned, young hunters captured, alliances threatened. Kane listened in silence, the weight of responsibility pressing like a storm on his chest. He had never led armies in the traditional sense, yet the principles of strategy, observation, and human ingenuity, The essence of Terran warfare remained within him. The test had come. He gathered his pupils. Their eyes, once wide with fear and wonder, now reflected trust and determination. Kane spoke with deliberate calm. They challenge us, yes. But strength alone will not win. Observation, planning, and courage will. We fight not to kill, but to survive and teach. We fight to show that one human's will can outlast an empire of chaos. For weeks, Kane prepared. Traps were constructed, communication networks established, patrols trained in techniques the aliens could grasp. Kane taught them to anticipate, to flank, to lure, to retreat when necessary, not as surrender, but as a tactical advantage. Each session was exhausting, yet each lesson transformed them further from instinct-driven beings into disciplined warriors guided by logic and human ingenuity. The first clash occurred at the edge of the river delta. Kane's pupils engaged the rival tribe in a series of calculated maneuvers, forcing them into ambushes, guiding attacks with signals, commands, and timing learned through years of disciplined teaching. The battle was brutal, yet Kane's methods minimized casualties. Strategy trumped raw power. Human intellect had triumphed over instinct. Kane fought alongside his pupils, wielding his plasma pistol and hand-forged weapons with precision. His body was scarred, his muscles screaming, yet his mind remained sharp. Every move, every decision was calculated. He was no longer just surviving. He was leading, shaping history, teaching lessons that would echo for generations. The rival tribe, frustrated and confused by these methods, retreated. Kane's pupils pursued only as necessary, showing mercy and restraint, a human trait unfamiliar to their species, yet essential to building loyalty and respect. Kane understood that survival without ethics was hollow. Humanity's essence was not just cleverness, but empathy, courage, and restraint. In the aftermath, Kane walked among his pupils, inspecting wounds, offering guidance, and sharing quiet words of encouragement. He realized then that they had not only survived, they had learned. The spark of human ingenuity, tempered by empathy and faith, had ignited in their hearts. They could think, adapt, and persevere on their own. Kane smiled, the weight of centuries pressing on him, yet lightened by the knowledge of legacy. But victory came with reflection. Kane sat beneath the alien stars, pondering the cost and meaning of conflict. He whispered a prayer, soft and instinctive. Not luck. Someone guided us through this. The wind shifted, carrying a subtle calm, as if affirming the quiet presence that had watched over him for decades. Kane understood that survival, civilization, and legacy were intertwined, shaped by courage, will, and unseen guidance. News of the battle spread. Other tribes, previously neutral or hostile, began to approach Kane, curious and cautious. They had heard of the lone Terran, the human who could teach, lead, and survive against impossible odds. Kane realized that his influence was expanding, not through conquest, but through example, wisdom, and trust. Humanity, even left behind, had left its mark, its absolute limits. Yet Kane remained vigilant. He knew that true peace was fragile, and that Orlan 7 would always test its inhabitants. Predators, storms, rival tribes, each challenge demanded adaptation, courage, and ingenuity. Kane had survived because he refused to surrender, and now he was shaping a civilization that could endure centuries of trials, long after he was gone. As the twin moons rose over the forest, Kane observed the encampments below, alive with movement, cooperation, and learning. He felt a quiet surge of pride, tempered by the awareness that the war had only just begun. The civilization he was building would face countless challenges, yet he had instilled in them the spark of humanity, the will to survive, the courage to act, the ingenuity to prevail. And deep in the forest, beyond the firelight and shadows, a presence stirred. Kane did not see it, yet he felt it, the subtle acknowledgement of one who guides, observes, and preserves the balance of life. The lone Terran had survived battles, storms, and centuries of solitude. Now, he was shaping legends. And somewhere in the dark, the force began to whisper a name: Kane Ward. The Terran who would not die. Kane's legend spreads beyond the forest. He will face the first true test of his long-term influence, as his civilization begins to develop culture, memory, and the beginnings of governance under human guidance. The decades had transformed the forest into more than survival grounds. It had become a cradle of civilization. Kane Ward walked among structures built of wood, stone, and salvaged Terran technology, each one a testament to ingenuity, patience, and human influence. Streams were dammed to create irrigation, shelters fortified into small villages, and pathways lined with markers teaching navigation and memory. Kane's pupils had grown into leaders, each taking responsibility for their sectors, their families, and their learning. The forest, once chaotic and untamed, now thrummed with organized purpose. Kane's work had evolved. Teaching survival was no longer enough. He introduced rituals, marking victories, mourning losses, honoring the cycles of life. He encouraged storytelling, insisting that memory and legend mattered as much as immediate survival. "A people without memory," he said quietly to his pupils one evening under the twin moons, "are like stars without light. You may exist, but you will not be remembered." The aliens, curious and attentive, absorbed these lessons, mimicking gestures, intonations, and symbols, slowly building a shared culture. The forest became a school, a laboratory, a battlefield, and a sanctuary. Kane taught strategy alongside ethics, empathy alongside cunning, foresight alongside instinct. His pupils learned not only to survive, but to govern, to negotiate, to lead. Conflicts still arose, misunderstandings between tribes, skirmishes with predators, but Kane's guidance ensured that each encounter was a lesson. The lone Terran was not merely a survivor. He was the foundation of a civilization that owed its logic, discipline, and compassion to one man's will. Kane walked among the villages, observing, correcting, praising. His pupils, now adults, had begun teaching others, expanding his influence far beyond what he could directly supervise. He marveled at the results. Instinctual creatures, once savage and solitary, had grown into thinkers, planners, and strategists. They debated, collaborated, and innovated. Kane's vision of humanity's spark extending beyond his species had become reality. Yet even in triumph, doubt whispered. Kane remembered Terran history, the cycles of empires rising and falling. Could this civilization endure beyond him? Could it retain the lessons, the discipline, the human essence that he had instilled? He studied the faces of his pupils, their alien features illuminated by firelight, and whispered a prayer: "Guide them. Not my will, but yours. Let them survive, learn, and endure." The wind stirred in answer, subtle yet comforting, and Kane felt the quiet affirmation of something unseen, something guiding. The true test came when a neighboring, untrained tribe refused to recognize Kane's authority. They raided a village at night, killing indiscriminately. Kane responded not with immediate violence, but with strategy. He studied the terrain, set traps, and instructed his pupils in tactics that blended cunning and restraint. When they confronted the raiders, Kane's pupils were ready, flanking, anticipating, disarming without unnecessary killing. The raid was repelled, the village saved, and the attackers fled. Kane's teaching had not only ensured survival, it had instilled morality, strategy, and foresight. The victory solidified Kane's legend. His pupils shared stories, passing them to younger generations, weaving his name into myth. Kane watched silently, aware of the weight of history being written in real time. Humanity's defiance, creativity, and empathy were no longer confined to him. They were embedded in the society he had shaped. And somewhere in that growing civilization, the spark of faith flickered. One of the young aliens whispered, after surviving a predator ambush, "Not luck. Someone wanted us to live." Kane smiled quietly, recognizing the reflection of his own belief and unseen guidance. Cultural milestones followed. Kane encouraged innovation in tools, architecture, and communication. Symbols were standardized, memories recorded, and lessons taught systematically. The aliens began to predict weather, coordinate defenses, and develop agriculture. Kane understood that he had created more than survival skills. He had initiated the first steps of civilization. Every act, every teaching, every decision was a lesson in ingenuity, empathy, and endurance. Humanity's essence had become inseparable from Orolon 7 itself. But Kane remained vigilant. Civilization, he knew, was fragile. One poor decision, one moment of hubris, and the progress of decades could vanish. He continued to teach personally, guiding leaders, correcting errors, instilling principles that would outlast him. And though he had grown old by human standards, his resolve remained unbroken. Each day was a lesson in perseverance, each challenge a reminder of humanity's power to shape, endure, and inspire. One night, under the pale glow of the moons, Kane stood on a ridge overlooking the villages. Fires glimmered below, smoke curling into the starlit sky. The forest hummed with life, order, and quiet energy. Kane whispered to the stars, a soft murmur of gratitude and wonder, "We endure, not by luck, not by chance, but by will, by courage, by the spark you placed in us." The wind carried the words across the forest. Somewhere beyond sight and understanding, the unseen presence responded in kind. And deep within the growing civilization, alien eyes reflected firelight and reverence. Kane Ward was no longer merely a man, he was legend. The lone Terran, the Terran who had survived, taught, and inspired, was becoming the foundation of a myth that would endure long after he was gone. And somewhere, beyond the ridges and the forests, whispers began to spread. The lone Terran teaches, the lone Terran guides, the lone Terran endures. Kane's society will face the ultimate test of endurance, overcoming centuries of environmental challenges, rival tribes, and isolation, cementing the myth of the lone Terran for generations to come. Centuries passed. Kane Ward, the lone Terran, had become more than a man. He was a symbol, a living bridge between worlds, a spark of humanity etched into Orolon 7's veins. His body, once lean and muscular, had grown weathered and scarred, yet his mind remained sharp. The forest, shaped by his guidance, had grown into a network of thriving settlements. Villages had become towns. Towns had become a network of interconnected communities, all under the subtle principles Kane had instilled: ingenuity, empathy, resilience, and foresight. The aliens had flourished. Kane's teachings had taken root in every generation. They remembered the lone Terran not just as a teacher, but as a guide whose presence had reshaped the world. Legends intertwined with reality. Young aliens would whisper stories of the human who walked through storms, who survived impossible odds, who taught them to think, to adapt, and to endure. Kane observed them with quiet pride, knowing that these legends carried the essence of humanity forward beyond his lifetime. Yet, survival remained Orolon 7's cruel teacher. The planet's fury tested them endlessly. Massive storms tore through settlements, rivers swelled to devour fields, and predators adapted in terrifying ways. Each catastrophe demanded innovation. Kane guided his pupils, now elders themselves, teaching them to anticipate, to prepare, to endure with wisdom. He emphasized not brute force, but cleverness. Dams that diverted floods, traps that neutralized predators, communication networks that coordinated defense. Humanity's essence, adaptation, cunning, and courage, was etched into every plan. The rival tribes had evolved, too. Some had joined Kane's civilization, their hostility softened by respect and fear of the lone Terran's methods. Others remained independent, occasionally challenging the settlements. Kane's strategies, refined over decades, emphasized not annihilation but influence. He showed his pupils that victory could be achieved through coordination, persuasion, and clever manipulation of the environment. The alien society grew smarter, stronger, and more united, their faith in the unseen order mirrored by the trust they placed in Kane's judgment. Kane's greatest challenge, however, was not the elements or rival tribes, it was time. Centuries weighed heavily, even on a man touched by fate. His body weakened, his vision dimmed, yet his mind remained keen. He trained leaders, mentored new generations, and ensured that the principles he had lived by would outlast him. Humanity, he realized, was not merely survival, it was the persistence of knowledge, culture, and ingenuity across generations. And through the aliens, that spark endured. He walked the settlements at night, observing, reflecting. Fires burned below, children playing, adults debating strategies, elders passing on knowledge. Kane whispered quietly to the stars, the same ritual he had performed for centuries. This is not luck. This is will. This is faith. Let it endure. A subtle wind stirred in reply, a faint affirmation of the presence that had guided him all these years. Then came a moment that would solidify his legend. A massive predator, unlike anything seen before, emerged from the depths of the northern mountains. Its intelligence was formidable, its strength terrifying. Kane's pupils, now trained leaders and strategists, hesitated. Fear rippled through the settlements. But Kane did not falter. He devised a plan that relied on every principle he had taught: observation, adaptation, coordination, and ingenuity. Traps were set, decoys positioned, and the predators lured into a canyon engineered for containment. The operation succeeded flawlessly. Watching the outcome, Kane felt the full weight of his centuries of labor. His pupils, now generations removed from those first alien children, had internalized his lessons. They acted not because he commanded, but because humanity's essence, the spark of defiance, intelligence, and empathy had been woven into their culture. Kane realized that survival was no longer his alone. It was now theirs, living and breathing through memory, innovation, and story. And yet, even in triumph, Kane felt the quiet ache of solitude. He was still alone as a Terran. The rest of humanity had long moved on, unaware that one of their own had reshaped a world into a civilization inspired by human ingenuity. Kane gazed at the alien moons, whispering once more, "Not luck. Someone wanted me to live. Someone wanted them to learn." He felt the faint, comforting presence, subtle but undeniable. Legends had taken root. The aliens now told stories of the lone Terran around fires, in caves, in the open fields. They described his bravery, his cunning, his persistence, and above all, his humanity. Kane smiled quietly in the dark. He had survived storms, war, isolation, and the relentless passage of time. But more than survival, he had created something enduring. Humanity, even in exile, had left a mark on a world that would remember it for centuries. And somewhere in the forest, in the deep shadows between settlements, eyes watched him, no longer merely alien, but aware, reverent, and inspired. Kane Ward had become legend. And the wind carried a whisper across the trees. The lone Terran endures. The lone Terran teaches. The lone Terran lives in memory. Humanity returns to Orolon 7 after centuries. Kane's legend has transformed the planet, and the Terrans will discover a civilization built entirely on one man's will, courage, and ingenuity. The Terran fleet pierced the upper atmosphere of Orolon 7 with the familiar hum of engines and the glare of fusion thrusters. Centuries had passed since Kane Ward's unit had retreated, leaving him stranded, presumed dead. For the returning humans, the planet was a curiosity, a remote world where a lone soldier might have survived, or might not. They expected ruins, perhaps signs of struggle, and maybe a few scattered tribes. They were unprepared for the reality that awaited them. Kane stood on the ridge overlooking a valley that had once been untamed forest, now a sprawling civilization of villages, cultivated fields, and disciplined, organized communities. His hair, streaked with gray and white, caught the light of the twin suns as he watched the fleet approach. He had lived longer than he should have, guided not by luck, but by the subtle presence that had carried him through storms, battles, and centuries of isolation. His pupils, now elders, leaders, and warriors, stood at his side, eyes reflecting awe, reverence, and recognition. The first humans who stepped onto Orolon 7 were stunned. They expected desolation, but found thriving cities, sophisticated strategies, and a society built entirely on survival, ingenuity, and discipline. But most shocking was the name on every lip, the lone Terran. Kane Ward. Humans and aliens alike told the stories of the man who had survived storms, wars, and isolation, teaching, guiding, and shaping civilizations across generations. A senior officer approached Kane cautiously, scanning the landscape, noting the structured defenses, the clear organization, and the thriving communities. "Sergeant Ward?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief. "We thought you—" "I'm still here," Kane interrupted, voice calm, but carrying the weight of centuries. "I've been teaching, surviving, guiding. Humanity doesn't end when fleets retreat, persists. When one will refuses to surrender." The Terrans were silent, absorbing the scope of what they saw. They had trained to fight, to survive, to follow orders, yet what Kane had achieved went beyond any training manual, beyond any military doctrine. One human's will had shaped an entire civilization, a society that balanced courage with wisdom, strategy with morality, and intellect with empathy. Humanity had left its mark not through technology or fleet power, but through persistence, creativity, and heart. Kane walked among his pupils as they demonstrated farming techniques, defensive strategies, and communication networks. Each system, each innovation reflected human influence. The returning Terrans were humbled. They had expected ruins. Instead, they found proof that the human spirit could thrive in exile, could inspire, and could endure beyond imagination. And yet, Kane did not let pride blind him. He reminded his pupils, now both alien and Terran, that survival was never permanent. The universe tested all who lived within it. "We endure because we prepare, because we learn, because we trust not only in ourselves, but in the order that guides us," he said quietly. Some of his pupils tilted their heads, mimicking his gestures, reflecting the deep cultural imprint of the lone Terran. Stories spread quickly through the Terran ranks. Engineers, soldiers, scientists, they all came to witness the civilization Kane had built. Children ran to him, elders bowed, and even skeptics could not hide their awe. Kane's influence was everywhere. Humanity, in his absence, had not vanished. It had survived, multiplied, and thrived through ingenuity, courage, and the quiet spark that Kane had embodied. The Terrans asked how he had survived, how he had built societies among alien species, how he had endured storms, predators, wars, and centuries of solitude. Kane simply looked at them and said, "One human's will can outlast entire empires. We survive not because of technology, not because of luck, but because we refuse to surrender, because we endure, because we teach, because we act with courage and reason, even when the odds are impossible." The aliens, now fully integrated into the civilization Kane had nurtured, stood alongside humans. They had learned not only survival, but empathy, strategy, and memory. Kane had transformed a world not through conquest, but through teaching, innovation, and unwavering defiance. Humanity's legacy had become living culture, history, and legend. As the sun set over the forests and cities of Orolon 7, Kane stood alone on the highest ridge, gazing at the horizon. The wind carried whispers of praise, stories of courage, and the quiet presence he had felt all his life. He realized that he would not be remembered merely as a man who survived, but as a force that transformed an entire civilization. One soldier left behind had shaped the destiny of a world. And somewhere in the stillness, Kane whispered a final acknowledgement. "Not luck. Someone wanted me to live. Someone wanted them to learn. Someone wanted this." The humans understood at last that the lone Terran was more than legend, he was proof. Proof of the relentless, creative, compassionate, indomitable essence of humanity. One man's courage had outlasted time, outlasted empires, and created a civilization that would endure long after any fleet had left the stars behind. The Terran soldiers bowed in respect, not merely to Kane Ward, but to what humanity could achieve when its will refused to yield. And as the twin moons rose over Orolon 7, the planet itself seemed to hum in acknowledgement of the lone Terran. The Terran who had refused to die, who had taught, who had endured. And thus the legend was sealed. One human, abandoned, forgotten by his fleet, had become the spark of civilization, the heartbeat of a world, and the eternal proof that the human spirit can outlast empires and shape the cosmos.